Welcome to the Story Learning Podcast, regular doses of language learning tips and motivation to help you become fluent in any language. With me, Olly Richards. For language programs, books, free resources, and much more, visit StoryLearning.com. Hello everyone and welcome to the show. If this is your first show, then thank you for tuning in. This is the show that I release twice a week where I aim to give you the motivation and the inspiration that you need to stay motivated in your language learning journey. And if you're learning a foreign language, well, the time that you need really the most motivation, I think, is probably when you first get started. And, you first hit that slump. Stuff starts to get hard and you realize you actually have to put in the hard work to learn a language. But then the other time that you need it is when you actually get to a fairly good level. You're already intermediate. You can hold a conversation. Speaking is not such a big deal. But that's not quite enough for you and you want to go further. You want to get to advanced. So how do you do it? This is today's question that comes from Nate in Bolivia.
Hey Ollie, what's going on? This is Nate Alger from Coachella, Bolivia, where I'm volunteering and working on my Spanish. My question for you is, do you have any advice for getting from language level B2 to C1 or C2 and becoming more of an expert in the language? Thanks so much for taking the time and all the best.
Hey Nate, thank you so much for your question. And I don't know where you were when you were recording that, but I almost felt like I was there in Bolivia, sort of on the streets. Maybe you were sitting in the back of a bus or something. So really atmospheric question. Thanks for that. And so let's get into this. And first of all, why is it that people struggle at the intermediate stage? It's such a common thing. People in fact, it's known as the intermediate plateau because it's inevitable for virtually any language learner that when you reach the intermediate stage or around about B1 on the Common European Framework of Reference, you start to find that your progress kind of grinds to a halt and that you're just not really improving. Now, this happens essentially because you have already become quite familiar with the most frequent words and phrases in the language. You've improved quickly up until now because you've been hearing all these words and phrases all the time coming at you. And now that you've learned them, you've got this kind of feeling of confidence, which is fantastic. You probably also speak Spanish and, you speak every day and you're quite used to giving your standard greetings and listening to what people say to you. Whatever you do for work, you're familiar with all the vocabulary that people use on a daily basis. And so you're comfortable with that. Essentially, everything's great, except you don't seem to be able to, take that next step forward and keep improving at the same rate. And it comes down to this concept of frequency and the fact that what you need to learn next is a step beyond what you've already learned. Okay, the stuff that's going to take you beyond that B1 stage up to B2 or even C1 or eventually even C2, the things that you need to learn to get there are things that you're not going to hear very often because it's the more kind of higher order language. The kind of stuff that people would have originally learned, back at school, for example, when they were studying. Certain technical terms that you only hear when people are talking about politics or, I don't know, the health service or whatever, things that you're not going to chat about over a beer on the street. And so I think the quote that really sums up this situation is this: what got you here won't get you there. And this is really pertinent because all the stuff that you've been doing so far to learn Spanish has been great to get you to the point that you are at the moment. But again, these are the things that you've been doing have been useful to learn the high frequency stuff that you get to hear and you get to read on a daily basis. Now, what's next is this less common language, stuff that you don't hear every day. So you need to change things up and do something a little bit different in order to start to learn that stuff. So what are these new different things? Well, first of all, you need to have a lot more challenging input in Spanish, okay? Which means that you need to, by all means, keep doing what you're doing. I'm sure you will anyway, but you need to get your sources of input from different places. That means reading more books. This means perhaps some more traditional heads down study like you may not have done to get where you are right now. It means doing things like listening to the radio, which is generally quite challenging language. But if you can find radio that comes with transcripts so you can follow along at the same time, listen and read, then I'll give you some ideas for this later on, then that is absolutely ideal. So stuff that's not your everyday exposure that you would normally get. All right, so you need to get more challenging input. That's the first thing. The second thing is that you need to start producing Spanish in a different way as well. Right, because it's all very well getting that input, but what you'll find is that because it's quite low frequency, because it's not such common language that you're taking in, you're not going to find it easy to remember. Because you might learn the word for establishment, for example, and you might hear it and you might think you've learnt it, but then you probably won't hear it again for another 6 months, by which point you've forgotten it, right? So you need to actually start to take the language, this new language you're going to get, and to actually produce it, because it's by involving yourself and personalizing the stuff that you're learning, that's how you retain information and start to kind of take ownership over the language. So if you're studying on your own, if it's a kind of self-study question, then here are a few things that I would say. First thing is, as a beginner in general, the kind of thing that works for people in terms of learning a language when they're abroad is quantity over quality. Quantity over quality. Okay, so what I mean by that is you kind of spend so much time exposed to Spanish, hearing it, that eventually you kind of learn it one way or another. And, indeed, that is quite a good study principle, actually. As a beginner, I think it's better to sort of come across a whole load of stuff, read widely, listen widely, speak a lot, because you don't know exactly what lessons you're going to learn and what you're going to take on board. So quantity over quality is usually quite a good strategy for a beginner. What you need now is to reverse that, and you need to go for quality over quantity. All right. So whereas in the past, maybe you would have kind of read through a magazine article kind of pretty quickly to get the gist, because a lot of it you didn't really understand. What you need to do now is to take that same magazine article and go through it with a fine-tooth comb and actually make sure you kind of understand stuff in detail. If you're writing down a new word, it's not enough just to kind of write down the word and maybe the definition, but to also put examples and maybe make some notes about how that word is used. Okay, so you're really going for the depth of kind of understanding of the stuff that you're studying. So that's a kind of principle. Secondly, I would really have a reading goal of some kind, because one of the main ways that you're going to get beyond intermediate and towards the more advanced stage is by reading a lot of books. It doesn't have to be books, it can be other stuff, but books are the most easily accessible things. And there's some fantastic literature in Spanish. I mean, I read a few Garcia Marquez books, like Love in the Time of Cholera and 100 Years of Solitude in Spanish, and they're not that difficult, they're really quite accessible. And you just get to read this beautiful language that you've never come across before, because people don't actually speak like that, So you get to read this amazing literature. You get to and enjoy it at the same time. So I'd definitely set yourself a reading goal of some kind, maybe reading for half an hour a day, something that's going to just push you. And I'd also have a writing goal of some kind. Like we said earlier, it's important not just to take it in, but also to put it out again. So something that's really good is to work with a teacher at this stage. I don't know whether you've got a teacher at the moment, Nate, but I think a teacher I'm sort of lukewarm on teachers in the early stages of learning a language, but a good teacher really comes in handy when you're kind of intermediate and beyond, because you need someone to point out the intricacies and the nuances of the language. So what I would do is work with a teacher or a tutor of some kind, and then try to write something every week, like a mini essay or a letter or something like that. Take some of the stuff you've been reading and write stuff on that same topic. Show it to your teacher, get them to correct it for you, talk through why they've corrected what they have, and really get into depth. The other great thing about having a teacher is it's a bit of accountability, because I know what it's like when you live abroad. Sometimes you're kind of more concerned with actually your day-to-day life and enjoying yourself, and maybe not feeling, going out so that you don't feel so lonely and stuff like that. That can be more important than actually sitting down and studying. All right, so having a teacher can really help with your accountability. Another thing that you can do is to get your teacher to choose an article for you each week, to bring an article onto the lesson. You read that article together, or even better, the teacher kind of gives you an article and you go away and read it during the week. Try to understand as much as you can, and then bring it back with questions. You then talk about those questions, about some of the more difficult language. Do you see where I'm going with this? Kind of taking some more difficult material and really going into depth with it. Something else you could think about doing is actually taking a course in Spanish. So whatever that may be, whether it's a kind of, going to ideally it would be something written. So I don't know if you've got any kind of universities or colleges near where you are, but if you could sign up for a course on a topic that interests you, ideally something slightly more academic that involves a bit of reading and writing, that would really be a way to kickstart your Spanish, because it would be tough for you at the beginning. But again, you've got this great mix of difficult material. You have to produce and do writing and you've also got a lot of accountability. I know some people who have been taking university programs in foreign universities, and their language level just gets to an insanely high level. So again, that's a more challenging one, but that would really give you a kickstart straight away. The other thing you might think about doing is actually enrolling in an academic Spanish program of some kind. Not your typical Spanish classes, but maybe academic Spanish or academic writing, or I don't know, business Spanish, something totally different that you haven't done before. Because again, that's just what that's going to do is just give you the kind of the impetus, the new material and the inspiration that you need to get away from this kind of daily Spanish that's got you to this stage really well, but is not going to be enough to get you further. Right, so I hope that makes sense, Nate. I hope that kind of answers your question and gives you an idea of a way forward. Essentially, what got you here won't get you there, and so you need to think about what you can do to change things up. If you'd like to ask me a question, I'd love to hear from you. Head over to iwillteachyoualanguage.com/ask, and that will send you to a widget where you can leave me a voicemail. You can also leave me a question in an iTunes review, and I'll definitely pick that up and be sure to answer your question. You can do that by going to iwillteachyoualanguage.com/review, and that will forward you on to iTunes, where you can leave that rating and review for me. Now, at the end of every episode, I like to leave you with a resource of some kind on the topic of the episode. And I've got a fantastic one for you today, especially for Nate, actually, because this is all about Spanish. It's how can you get to a higher level in Spanish. And you remember earlier on, I mentioned the fact that one of the really great things to do is to start to listen to radio shows and follow along with the transcripts. Well, there's a fantastic website called Radio Ambulante, which is got a whole load of stuff. Part of which is podcasts. It's got these great podcasts in Spanish, and the full transcript to everything is available on the website. So you can listen to these podcasts in natural Spanish and download the transcript and follow along at the same time, dissect it all. This is, you've got a lifetime of material right there. So Radio Ambulante is the name of the website. All of this is going to be in the show notes, which is at iwillteachyoualanguage.com/episode 20. So you can find it there. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you on the next episode of the podcast. Thanks for listening to today's episode. And here at Story Learning, everything that I do is powered by stories, whether that's writing books, teaching lessons, crafting courses. My mission is to help everyone succeed at learning a new language through the power of story. And we now have comprehensive language courses in over 15 languages, from Spanish to French, Korean to Japanese, and across all levels from beginner to mastery. And you can take a 7-day free trial of any of these programs by visiting storylearning.com/courses. I've poured my heart and soul into creating these courses over the last 10 or so years, and we've helped tens of thousands of new students achieve their dreams of learning a new language, all through the power of story. So go ahead and take a free trial. There's no commitment. You can try out our method for free. See if this can also be the breakthrough for you that it's been for so many other people. Storylearning.com/courses.